911 operators of Reddit. What was the dumbest non-emergency you picked up? I've had so many, I can even remember most of them. Two that come to mind instantly are one, toddlers whose parents give them phones to play with which aren't connected to any service. Yeah, they still work for 911 and we can't call you back on them either. Luckily, the mapping system usually works pretty well to the extent that not only can I tell the address, but can often tell the officers which area of the house the calls are coming from. 2. Dude called 911 because he got off a train at the wrong stop and was broke. Honestly, it wasn't even his predicament so much as he was absolutely obnoxious about it. Even called 911 several more times after I had already told him officers were en route. Annoying that he's tying up a line for medical emergencies. But that being said, I'm going to preach a little. If you honestly think you may have an emergency, but aren't sure if it qualifies for 911 use, don't worry about it and just do it. All emergency services personnel would much rather have much ado about nothing than have something terrible happen when it could have been prevented. This goes for all types of emergencies situations. Also, do not underestimate fire. It grows at an unbelievable rate, and seconds can be the difference between life and death. The last major fire I worked, the caller called 911 and hung up on me after giving me her address. I called her back, at which point she tells me she came home to a small fire, but it's out now. I dispatched the fire department and told her fire staff are on the way just to make sure. She said okay in a tone like that's really not necessary, and we ended the call. She called back a few minutes later, very upset, telling me it wasn't extinguished after all. Ended up being a 2-alarm fire, gas lines in the walls on fire from basement to attic. Fire staff said if I hadn't dispatched them when I did, the whole neighborhood would have gone up based on how woodsy and windy it was. Commenter: I called 911 for fire brigade because someone, probably kids, had set some leaves, sticks on fire nest to a chain link fence in car park. It was mostly out by time they got there. I was a bit embarrassed, but they said very strongly, always call them out. Once I called in a construction dumpster on fire. It was on the other side of a fence and pretty close to the new house that was being built. I was the only person around the office on a Saturday. Dispatch told me, just try and put it out with the hose. We don't deal with stupid contained fires like WTF. I hung up and called from a different phone line and told them the building was on fire. Story 2. One caller was concerned for his safety when going outside his house because the neighbor, a couple of houses down, had his table saw out in his garage, and he was afraid the wind would blow the blade over to his house and injure him. I really need to start writing these down. Story 3. Oh, the ducking things I can write. Been doing this for over a decade. The 3 that come to mind: my iPod broke and had a guy call in a serious panic saying someone was trying to break into his house. He sounded super panicked, anxious. I heard loud knocking through the phone. The caller also threw in, I pay your ducking taxes, now send the ducking cops. I don't want to die, etc. I could hear that constant loud door banging in a muffled voice. The guy then throws in, I just had pizza delivered here and now I have someone trying to break into my house. And then I could hear through the phone the delivery guy say, Sir, you forgot your change. Over and over. That was back in 2009 and still bothers me at the utter stupidity. Finally me, 911, police, fire, ambulance. Police! Send the ducking cops to address now. There's a serious emergency. Silence. Then suddenly I hear tons of laughter from grown adults. Haha, don't actually send the cops. This is just a joke. I also heard in the background, I can't believe he really did it. The cops were already dispatched, and by the time they got to the house, they were not amused. Oh, my colleague, someone called 911 to report a stranger called me an idiot at the train station. My colleague had to inform the caller that name-calling isn't a crime. Story 4. My grandma used to call 911 to have the fire department being her milk. She lived next to the fire department. She did this multiple times. Eventually, the fire chief gave her his direct line, and he brought her milk until she came to live with us. She passed away in 2004. My grandma was in early stages of dementia when this was happening, and it was a small-town fire department with a chief who had known her 30 years. Story 5. Guy called 911 before because he ordered a Filet-O-Fish from the drive-thru at McDonald's and it had ketchup on it. He was adamant about wanting the police to show up. His argument was that he worked at McDonald's when he was 16 and you don't put ketchup on Filet-O-Fish. He got the police all right, and a DUI charge. The second one, oh boy, calls 911 from a payphone. 911, what's your emergency? I don't have an emergency. I didn't have quarter and I want to talk to a cop. Do you have $699.75? Huh? What are you talking about? Sir, 911 is for emergencies. You can be fined for misusing 911. Are you going to get me a ducking cop or not? Sure. Yeah, he got the fine for it. Commenter. Back when I was doing it, there was a fair amount of leniency for sassing idiots like that. I've been out of that game for a long time now, but from what I understand, there's not much leniency anymore. People are very quick to complain about anything and everything. especially when they feel like they've been wronged. And boy, oh boy, do they feel wronged a lot when it comes to their emergency. Being a 911 call center, those kind of complaints are taken very seriously and investigated. They're largely thrown out as the odds are good that the caller was in fact being an idiot. Story 6. I have a court date coming up, but I have to go camping that day. What should I do? Reporting the moon missing. Advice on what kind of lotion to put on a sunburn. Anytime the power goes out, a ton of people call the police and report their power being out. They have PSAs about this crap all the time. 1 in 5 calls on some days would be people asking for police and going, "But I want non-emergency," or calling 911 to ask for the 10-digit non-emerge. Guy calling because he left his backpack inside of a U-Haul when he was moving. Commenter? I once heard of a 911 call where this guy calls early in the morning to report a forest fire. He goes on saying it's getting closer and then goes silent. He then said, "Never mind. The forest fire was the sun coming up." He admitted that he normally isn't up at this early in the morning. Story 7. When I was around 6, I was spending the day with my grandmother while my father was at work. She was preparing dinner for all of us and needed my father to pick something up on his way home. This was the age before cell phones were ubiquitous, and she didn't know his work number off the top of her head, but that's all right. I knew his work number. Now, I was only 6, but I was pretty sharp for my age, so she just assumed that maybe I knew his work number. So she pulls me up on the tall chair by the phone and has me dial, and I do, 911. My father worked at fire dispatch, so I was technically correct. Anyway, a lady answered, and I asked if my dad was there. Not his name, just my dad. We get into a bit of a back and forth about how I called 911, and yeah, I know my dad works at 911. Eventually, we do get my dad on the line, I think, after the dispatcher asks my name. He asks to put my grandmother on the line. They talk for a bit, and that's that. Apparently, it happens from time to time. It wasn't a huge deal, and I wasn't in trouble. But my dad made sure to put the proper call line on my grandmother's speed dial, and he had to talk to me about how I can't use that number if it's not an emergency. Commentaire. I traveled with my mom and my little cousins to visit their grandma in Canada. We were coming back to the US, and were passing immigration, and they asked our relationship with the kids since they were afraid of kidnapping. The lady casually asked a few questions like, "Do you know these people? Are you going against your will? Where are your parents?" And finally she asked, "What are the names of the people you're with?" The youngest one said, "Aunt" in Chinese. The lady looked up at him, "Us," and then back at him again. She pointed at my mom and asked, "What is her name?" This mofo dead ass looked the immigration lady in the eye and said, "What do you mean, what's her name? Her name is Aunt." She let us through after some explaining. But after that, we found out my youngest cousin genuinely did not know my mom's name. Story 8. Caller. There is a shark in the ocean. Me. Yes, ma'am. That is where we keep them. Caller. I want to report a robbery. Me. Tell me what happened. Caller. I am at Burger King and I ordered 6 chicken nuggets, but they only gave me 5. Caller. There is this light in the sky out over the harbor. Me. Looking out the window from which I can see the area. Sir, that is the moon. Story 9. The news doesn't show how often people call for beasts. It's daily. Was a 911 op for 7 years. Just some of them. Bacon was fake bacon, not real bacon on their fast food. Are homeless people allowed in the park? Someone called to tell us we don't need to use lights and sirens at night on our emergency vehicles because it woke up their baby. Broken heart, asked for an ambulance. Not chest pains. It was a breakup that had just happened. Didn't like the way the neighbors threw out their garbage. Tons of calls about people being the wrong race in their neighborhood. Too much MSG in their Chinese food. Pretending that someone was being kidnapped. Tying up several resources for almost an hour for an April Fool's prank. Our jurisdiction makes it very hard to get people in trouble for calling 911, even if it's for bees. Commentaire. As a 911 operator, the wrong race one gets me. Anytime I hear that, I get fired up. Also, it always seems to be the people who start out by naming their neighborhood. Caller. I live in Eagle Meadows, and there is someone here that doesn't belong. Me. Ma'am, could it be your racist ass? Story 10. There are just too many. Others have already mentioned the calls asking for the non-emergency lines or the racist ones with people who don't belong. I think the one that takes the cake for me was the lady who called in about a male with a dangerous weapon. Frantic caller. I want to report a suspicious male. Me. Okay, where is he? Gets location. What makes him suspicious? Caller. Well, he's walking down the street carrying a dangerous weapon. Me. What kind of weapon does he have and what is he doing with it? Caller. He has a snake. It's around his neck. Someone should do something. Me. Ma'am, a snake is not a weapon, nor is it illegal. With the new iPhone features making it easy to call 911. There have been many times I thought I was hearing a fight, only to realize it was just people having sex. And they bumped their phone too many times. Oh yeah, and the time Christian Grey called wanting a cop to come unlock his handcuffs because he accidentally used the real pair instead of the sexy pair. Story 11? There are far too many to mention, but the worst one was The fuel pump won't accept my card, told them. It wasn't a police matter and hung straight up. The dumbest one was middle of one night. Bloke rang in a panic and said he was being burgled. Had walked to the bathroom in the middle of the night and seen a guy on the landing. Sprinted back to his bedroom and rang the police. 3 cop cars and a dog unit speed over to his house and do a sweep of the house. Couldn't find anything. When one cop asked him where he'd seen this guy, he showed him the hallway, which had a very large, full-sized mirror at the end. Turns out the guy had seen his own reflection in the dark. Needless to say, it caused a lot of laughter from the cops and in the control room, and a lot of embarrassment from the guy. Story 12? Where do I even start? My 2-year-old has a piece of toilet paper in her nose. I asked the waiter for no vegetables with my steak, and there's broccoli on my plate. My chair is trying to kill me. Older woman who would consistently lean too hard into her recliner and flip it. She strategically had her landline right there. 2 women called screaming so violently, I was convinced they were being mauled or murdered. Their neighbor's ferret slipped under the door to their apartment. Commenter, the ferret. One time we had that happen. Heard my sister call out for my mom, and I was like, if it's really important, she'll call me. Next minute she calls me, at which point I know something bad must be happening. I go out and there is a ferret hanging off her leg that chased her in from outside. Mom just kept telling her to come in here if you want to talk to me because she assumed it wasn't important. We still tease her about that sometimes. We didn't call 911, but it took a lot of hysterics and it biting my foot for no reason before we were able to throw it in our cat carrier. Went to our immediate neighbors. Oh, you got the ferrets? They're other neighbors. Just let them know and they'll come round and get them. Apparently, ferret escapades were common for them, and they didn't bother, locking them up the first few times they got out. It was even more random because we lived in a rural area, so these things hiked hundreds of meters to our backyard. There was a second one that we never found. Bonus points since, on top of not being properly contained, they weren't vaccinated or desexed either. While I was gone, my mom reported to the police station that there was an otter or something in our house, since she apparently didn't recognize what a ferret was. I could go on, but I'll give my favorite longer call. Caller. I had a lady friend over. I went to get us drinks. There was $400 on my dresser. Now she's gone, and so is the money. Me, trying to get a description. What was her name? Do you know where she lives, etc., since he opened with saying he knew her caller? I'm not really sure. I can't remember me. You don't know your friend's name? Awkward pause. Do you want to find out and call back? Story 13. While sort of not exactly what was asked, our friend is a cop. Well, LT now. He remembers being called to a violent domestic disturbance. The person on the phone apparently lied. When he opened the door, a woman started yelling about how her BF overcooked a pizza and it was blackened and no good. The BF's response was, it was a $3 cheapy store pizza and an accident. They started squabbling again, and our friend told them that wasting the police's time on something like this is wrong, and lying about being hit and whatnot can get you in trouble with the police. The woman argued it was a big deal, and her BF needed to be arrested because he refused to give her $3 back so she could get another pizza. Needless to say, the officer tried getting their info since you have to make a report, but the lady ended up punching her BF. Our friend grabbed the woman and told her to stop. Lady turned around and spit on our friend and called him a useless pig. Needless to say, she was arrested. Someone had told the cop a few weeks later that she filed a suit against her BF, $3 for the pizza and $997 for emotional trauma. Don't know if she won or not, guessing not. The life of a police officer. Yikes. Story 14. UK. My friend works as a 999 operative. She had one guy call and tell her he was a vampire, and another who pretended he could see something happening outside that required armed response. She quickly called through to her line manager to explain she was pretty sure he was giving her details about an episode of The Wire, but they still had to send the armed response to an empty car park surrounded by high-rise buildings. Story 15. Not the operator. I'm the idiot that called. Years ago, my now husband was returning from a conference several states away in a rental van with a few other people. It was the middle of winter, and an ice storm was about to hit our home city. Since he was in a rental, I was meeting him downtown as he didn't have a car there. I went to the building early because of the weather and camped out in the lounge where there were nice, comfy couches and no one else would be there. Our plan was to stay there until the weather got better the next day. It's around 4 a.m. and they get back to town, which, of course, is when the ice storm is hitting. I get a panicked call from my husband. We're just down the block. I need you to call 911 and tell them the car is about to slide off a cliff into the river. So I reacted in kind and call 911 and explain what's going on, that there's a car about to slide into the river. I poke my head out the door of the building and can see the van, sitting in the alley less than a block away. My husband and colleagues are crawling on their knees across the alley because they keep slipping on the ice. Then after a few beats, I said, "Wait, I'm so sorry. I have no idea why I'm the one calling. I can see them now, and they are several blocks from the river, and I don't know what they're talking about when they said a cliff." The operator was nothing but professional. "Okay, ma'am, is anyone hurt?" An officer's on the way. No, no one is hurt. I don't know if that's necessary, it's just very icy. I understand. Tell your husband to call us back if they need help. Not a minute or two later, the cop shows up. We were downtown, so he was probably close by. He assesses the situation, slips on the ice but catches himself, and proceeds to drive the van away from the cliff and into a parking spot. By this time, my husband has made it into the building where I find out that the cliff was a 4-drop off the side of the road onto gravel. I'm surprised my eyes didn't pop out from rolling so hard. I felt so stupid for reacting instead of taking a minute to assess what was going on. Thankfully, the cop and operator were super chill about it. Story 16 probably will get buried, but on the iPhone, you can snooze your alarm by pressing the lock button. Coincidentally, you can also call 911 by pressing the lock button multiple times. I've done this twice now, and both times, the guy on the line laughed at me. Story 17. Neighbor is a retired dispatcher. Latest great story is a lady called 911 to report a police officer blocking the road. She wanted him to stop blocking the road and he wouldn't move. The problem? A boat in the road, taking up the entire road. She wouldn't have been able to get by. Never mind the huge crane there to lift the boat, also blocking the entire road with its outriggers and the trailer. The boat was going on, also sitting dead nuts middle of the road to be loaded. But she called 911 to tell them to make the cop move. She had a hair appointment, and she was going to miss it if he didn't let her by. But she's going to sit there and call 911. Also, we have seals in the harbor I live near in winter sometimes. And I'm sure we'll have one this winter. And when it leaves, someone will call 911 to ask where the seal is. Also, if the seal is sleeping, someone will call 911 to tell them the seal is sick. Story 18. I know a few 911 operators, and they tell me that they consistently get 911 calls to make sure it works. Clearly, in this day and age when idiots seem to rule, this needs to be said. 911 does indeed work. You'll find out when the cops arrive at your door and give you a blast of crap for being among the most stupid people in the nation. And hopefully, a hefty fine as well. Story 19. When my daughter was 5, she spent a week with my dad. He gave her an old iPhone to play with. He said he got a kick out of it. BC, she has been fake talking to someone all week. Well, towards the end of the week, she handed the phone to him and he played along and said hello. It was a 911 operator. She had been calling all week to chat with them. They weren't mad, but wanted to let my dad know that, out of service, iPhones can still call 911. Story 20. I'm and military police so stupid calls are common. This one really blew my mind amongst the others. We have a guy who's a traditional reservist in our unit for almost a decade and has to drive several miles for each drill weekend. That being said, he has to stay at the on-base hotel. The dumb git is incompetent enough, as it is, and knows the non-emergency number by heart. He's gotten himself locked outside the room once that night and called us non-emergency. It's almost 2 a.m. We hear the 911 emergency phone go off. As we pick it up, it's him and says he got himself locked out the room. Story 21. Honestly, that's about half of what 911 is. I use a wrist rest for my keyboard, so when I head desk during some stupidity, I have a good cushion and don't accidentally concuss myself. I fear the future of video 911, not because I'm worried about what I'll see, but because I have very expressive hands and I feel like people would get upset if they watched me practice my Jedi skills on them. But one that is both very dumb and has knowledge everybody might benefit from are people who call from right outside a hospital or after already being in the waiting room. They either want to go to a different hospital because they don't like the wait, how they've been treated, or want to be brought back to the same hospital in an ambulance. Here's the thing. Emergency ambulances aren't taxis and they will take you to the closest hospital able to provide the level of care you need. And whenever you get to the ER, regardless of how you got there, you will be triaged by a nurse and treated in order of urgency. You don't get any bonus points on your triage based on how you got there, and if you check in a second time, you're a new patient. So you go from a non-urgent who has been waiting for 2 hours to a non-urgent who is at the bottom of the waiting list. And spoiler alert, the closest hospital able to provide the level of care you need is almost always the one 50 yards away with the nurses you almost certainly got crafty with before you stormed out to call 911. But an ambulance will be happy to bill you for the drive back to see them. One more, because I have never understood the thought process, are people who call 911 to report fires that our units are already on scene asterisk and the person calling can see them. We always want to make sure they're not reporting a second fire, so, sir, do you see the fire engines there? Oh yes, I just wanted to make sure you all knew about it. Are there, like, roving bands of fire engines just out fighting fires vigilante style? Head meet wrist rest. Story 22. 911 Education Day at schools were the worst because around 3:30 the phones would light up with kids testing to see if it really worked. But my favorite 911 of all time, Frightened Boy. Yes, I was having sex with my girlfriend and the condom came off and she still has it inside. Story 23. So many that it's hard to pick the dumbest. My favorite, though. 60-year-old lady called because her husband finished on the recliner and forced her to sit in it. She wanted to know if she would get pregnant. I gave her my honest opinion, and then transferred her to the jurisdiction she was in, and listened to another dispatcher go through the same conversation. Police were dispatched to check the welfare. The dumb part to me was that she thought she could get pregnant. Story 24. I called 911 by mistake one time when I was trying to call internationally. Since at work you had to dial 9 to get an outside line, I did that out of habit and fat-fingered something else. Then I heard the voice answering. When I realized it was emergency services, I quickly said, "Oh, that was a mistake. Sorry, there's no problems here." I thought I was clear, but 5 minutes later, the small-town cops were at the door. My stepkids wanted to know why the police were there, so I told them it's okay and to go to their rooms. The cops did not like this. "No, it's okay. You guys stay right here." Finally, after asking us all questions, they went on their way. I'm glad they checked up and talked to the kids, but man, that was embarrassing. Story 25. Did 9/11ths dispatch for a county in Central Florida for about 6 months while I was waiting for my real job to pick me up. We were police side, night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Thing that blew me away was that we had regulars, as in people that just called 911 sometime around 3, 4 in the morning, usually drunk, usually because they'd been kicked out of a bar. Sending the cops out to arrest them was an obvious waste of time, so you'd usually tell them you were going to call the 7, 11, and tell them to stop selling them beer if they didn't stop calling. One guy's name was Ryan, forgotten the others. This was 16 years ago. Then there were the crazy ones. A lot of this guy is trying to shoot me with a gazer, combination gamma ray and laser as it turned out. Didn't ask about the physics. Best one started at about 2 a.m. and ran until almost 5. Woman lost in woods. Woke up, didn't know her name or where she was. Said she'd been abducted. This was pre-smartphone and cell hits back then were 50/50ths. Some providers you got a great location, others might be a mile radius. This was the latter. It was February, abnormally cold year, so hypothermia was a concern. Ended up with 2 helos looking. This county had 3, numerous cars and fire trucks out searching. So finally one of the ground units finds her car. Vehicle totaled, yellow paint down the side. About a mile back up the road is the school bus farm where they park all the county buses. Go to check it and yup, someone hit half the buses in there. Get the bloodhounds on her trail and they find her in a drainage pipe, hiding from the cops. Concussed, lost, but aware enough to know she didn't want to be found. She was your average Central Florida chronic drunk. Left bar, brained herself driving through a school bus parking lot, through a chain link fence, made it another mile before car died. Story 26. I don't work for an emergency answering service, but I still have a stupid story. I live in Switzerland, and some trains have compartments which should be made available for the elderly or disabled. They are equipped with an emergency button which alerts 911 when pressed. One time late at night, I decided to sit in such a compartment since the train was completely empty. Plus, there's more space, and I am quite tall, 6'2". I listened to music with my headphones. Naturally, I whipped my legs to it. Because of my height, my knee kept pushing the emergency button when I wobbled my legs without me noticing it. In addition, I didn't hear how the call went off because I had activated the noise-canceling function on my headphones. At the next station, 2 rescue workers stormed the train expecting to find an elderly person who probably suffered a heart attack or something since she didn't answer. I would have rather sunk to the ground than give them an explanation why they only met a completely healthy teenager. Luckily, they were pretty understanding, and I only had to pay a small bill, which was partly even covered by my insurance. Since this incident, I never ever sat down in such a compartment. Stupid teenager pressed emergency button without noticing and got stormed by rescue workers. Story 27. Paramedic here. I have been called out for a grown man who nicked himself shaving. It had stopped by the time we arrived. I taught him the toilet paper square trick and about styptic pencils. He still wanted the $40 taxi ride to emerge. Called out for a 4-year-old with hand-mouth-foot disease, common viral disease that causes irritating pustules. Mother called an ambulance because her 2-year-old didn't want to go to the hospital. Had to explain to the mother that she is the decision maker and that she can simply pick the baby up and place her in the car seat even if she fusses. So she did. This was a 911 lights and sirens emergency call out. Was called out because an adult had a nightmare. Was self-aware of this fact? Still called 911. I've forgotten hundreds of silly, non-emergent, fail-to-adult calls for everyone I remember. All you can do is be helpful, respectful, educate in a non-condescending way, all the while wondering how they survived life all these years. Story 28. I'm an EMT. We get called to a house approximately 30 minutes away from our station, almost in the next county, for a complaint of an 18-year-old feeling strange. Dispatch is unsure what exactly to tell us since the complainant has hung up, so we don't know what to expect when we arrive on scene. We get to the house, walk up to the front door, knock on it, and when it's opened, we are greeted by a living room full of teenagers eating pizza and high as a kite, giggling like idiots. The place reeks of W. The caller is in the kitchen and tells us that he called because he's always wanted to see what the inside of an ambulance has looked like. While my partner is asking him if there's any real medical emergency, I inform dispatch over my radio that this is going to now be a law enforcement issue. We tell the kid that this was a waste of an ambulance meant for emergencies only, and he seems to have no regret. Story 29. So many, but I'll try to keep it short. 1. Parents who call on children for not listening or throwing tantrums. I mean kids 6 and under. Had a guy call 3 times in a night for his son, and he got mad at me for telling him to use the non-emergency number and not 911. 2. Karens not getting their way. One lady wanted to speak to officers because the people she was harassing were sassy with her. Officer told her that being sassy is not against the law. Another guy called in about employees calling his girlfriend fat and telling them to leave the store. His full-grown girlfriend was trying to ride in the small store cart, and employees said she was too big for it and to get out of it or leave the store. A male Karen called a prox 20 times in a few-hour spans, screaming about a homecoming dance music and that he pays taxes and they shouldn't be allowed to have dances and other nonsense. 3. People doing the nasty. I don't know why, but seems like it's really hot for some people to call 911 while doing nasty things. I hate hearing it, and I feel bad sending officers, but we have to. There are many more, but I think this is good for now. Story 30. Not exactly a 911 dispatcher, but I used to dispatch medical helicopters. Caller. Why is Life Flight following me? Me. What? Caller. Why is the helicopter following me? Me. It must be lost. Caller. Will take me off the list, me. Sure thing. Vertical bar. The helicopter was in fact not following this crazy lady, Omao. Story 31. On the flip side of this, I once took myself off to outpatients. Basic hospital intake, not massive emergency, generally just I can't afford GP. No calling 000 and wasting anyone's time. I get in and tell them that I hadn't been able to go for over a week, and now couldn't piss either, and I didn't know how long it had been. I'd have to have been less than coherent to anyone with eyes and ears. They give me crap, saying constipation is not an emergency. Just go to your GP. I said I didn't feel good. Everything below the belt had stopped working a while ago. Eventually, someone sensible enough asked me if I was an alcoholic. I said yes. Alcoholics have a crap grasp of time. They admit me, ultrasound, and find out I was an inch from rupturing my colon, plus very possible sepsis and death. My bladder was 3 times normal size, and I had to be cathetered immediately to relieve pressure. I was pissing red liquid into a bag for 3 days. My kidneys were failing, liver was next, and heart a close third. If that or doc had gone with everyone else's recommendation and told me to piss off and go you a GP and stop wasting resources, I'd be dead. Story 32. Not really a 911, 999th thing. I was waiting at A&E one night as I'd cut my finger pretty bad at the bar I worked at, and it wouldn't stop bleeding. Some guy had come in because his girlfriend had kicked him in the nuts. As it wasn't life-threatening, he had a long wait ahead of him like me. He was indignant about the whole thing and kept screaming at everyone, threatening to leaving, calling an ambulance to pick him up, being brought back to the same A&E, and amazed that he was now further down the queue. The whole thing went on for 4 hours, if not more. He was there when I came in and still screaming at everyone when I left. I've been kicked in the nuts. It's bad. I wouldn't waste a doctor's time over it, though. Madness. Story 33. So once someone spoofed my husband's, at that time BF phone number, called 911, and reported a DV situation in a town about 3 hours away, gave no address or info, just he's beating her kind of thing. What happens? Cops show up at our door and wanted to arrest my BF for domestic violence because I had a massive black eye and our apartment was trashed from a party the night before. They started asking me about if I was okay, etc. I was super confused. I worked in a kitchen at the time and was super clumsy. The black eye was from dropping something on my foot and then smashing my own face off the corner of a prep table trying to pick it up. I have very poor spatial awareness sometimes. The whole mess took like 3 hours to figure out. I'm grateful officers were dispatched on the off chance I called or someone who knows us did. They dispatched officers in the other town too, but IDK if anything was actually figured out. Story 34. Got a call for a rat running around a shelf in the caller's room. Keep in mind, I take my job seriously. Everyone's call is an emergency to them. I'll respect that. This is the only call I've almost broke on and laughed. She had a thick accent and was on the verge of tears, and I was struggling to understand her. Eventually, after much confusion, she spells out MOUSE and mimics a mouse laugh, something like mahehe, and I about lost it. I had to mute my phone and stand up. The mouse impression was like nothing I've ever heard, just so visceral and out of left field. She was so afraid of this mouse, though, we did send over an officer to clear the house for her. I stayed on the phone with her until responders arrived and comforted her, ensuring this wasn't a dumb call to make, and that our officers would be happy to help. I still have that recording saved. It makes me happy every time I hear it. Story 35. Caller. I'd like to report a suspicious person. Operator. Okay, what does he look like? Caller. He's wearing X, and he's black. Operator. Okay, what is he doing that's suspicious? Caller. Nothing, but he just looks really suspicious. Turns out he's just a man walking. A lot of people don't realize that the citizens making the 911 calls that police have to respond to are the really racist ones. And the police get just as tired of their racism as the dispatchers. Also, another one. A lady came in to report a suspicious black man who was doing absolutely nothing suspicious. She came to report it because I felt like he was going to break into my neighbor's yard. Story 36. It was my aunt. I had a tree climbing phase as a 2-year-old, and she was terrified of heights. Even standing on top of a chair was a lot for her. So she called 911, screaming at the top of her lungs. I was at the top of a tree, and I was about to plummet to my death. Fire truck comes flying over in record time like 3 guys ran into the backyard and just stood there dumbfounded. I was sitting on a branch on a juvenile tree that was well within reach for a tall person. An average-sized person could have reached me with a chair. I was sitting there watching my aunt sob and scream hysterically, rolling around on the ground, still on the phone with 911, while my siblings and cousins she was also babysitting, sat there watching her while drinking Hawaiian punch. So while a guy tried to calm my aunt down, a guy reached up, picked me up off the branch, and put me on the ground. My aunt ran over, scooped me up, and squeezed me like I'd just been in life-threatening danger. My uncle was not amused at the bill they got over this incident. Story 37. I answered police calls in the UK. Had one come through on 999 where a woman was reporting that a neighbor had forced the caller's 8-year-old son into eating 4 or 5 pears that he had shaken off her tree. It was really difficult to keep a straight voice, and really difficult to know how to classify that from the predefined categories on the system. In the end, I went with antisocial behavior, and dispatch sent a PCSO to calm her down. Story 38. I called a non-emergency line once while a bit manic and left a message to let them know we would be filming my friend's Mustang for an amateur film, and that if they got reports of loud noises or speeding, it was for a film and we were being careful. I stuttered through most of it, but I gave them my phone number and first and last name in case they needed to verify. It wasn't until I hung up that I just pre-admitted to a crime and gave them our exact location and contact info. I never got a call and none of us got arrested. I just imagined someone got into the office early one morning, listened to the voicemail, and had a good laugh about stupid kids doing stupid things. Story 39. The sheriffs had shut down a major road because there was a fatal head-on collision. It was clear that something major was going on because the whole sheriff's department, as well as a ton of fire/rescue/ambulances, were there. We got so many calls saying the road was closed, like we didn't know. The girl who answered the initial call about the crash took another call about the road being closed. I could hear the person on the line screaming and cursing at her that it was inconvenient for them that they had to wait while the road was closed. She was usually very calm and collected, but that person pissed her off. She responded, "Yeah, and the road is closed because a guy just ducking died on it. I'm sure his family thinks that's really inconvenient too." We also had a mentally ill woman who would call us regularly. She allegedly was missing an arm and would always threaten to beat us with her amputated arm. Story 40. So I am not a 911 operator, but I did work in an ER in a LV Teku trauma and first contact hospital. Basically, 911 calls us and basically asks where to send the patient. So dispatch contacts the hospital and reports, "We've got a 56-year-old female complaining of problems." Sorry, dispatch didn't quite get that. What's the chief complaint? Chief complaint is problems. 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 What kind of problems, dispatch? Chest pain, shortness of breath, fall, trauma, abdominal pain. What's the problems? Just problems. She refused to elaborate. Send her to not our hospital, we ain't dealing with that. Story 41. Slight reversal on my part. My dad was a village bobby in small village in the Scots borders. We lived in a bungalow that had an office and cell attached. When the phone rang in the office, 4-year-old me would run through and grab the phone, "Hello, ta-ta," and put it back down. He reminded me every time we met anyone new for years afterwards. Story 42. My wonderful nephew, who has physical and intellectual disabilities, called 911 because the cat stole his piece of chicken. Because he can't really speak, they must have heard basically grunts and groans as he tried to tell his story. They got to his house and found out everything was okay, and he enjoyed the attention from the officers who responded. Unfortunately, they had to teach him to not call 911 after that, because he called 3 or 4 times after the first time because he wanted to see his new friends. Story 43. Dispatched for a 200 SQ mile district with under 70K people, so even the main city wasn't very densely populated. Got a call one night on 911 from a guy who wanted animal control dispatched. Convo went like this. "Caller, there's a raccoon." Me, "Where's the raccoon?" Thinking we might be able to send someone if it's trapped inside or something. Caller, "In my front yard." "He's in the tree." Me, "I think that's where raccoon lives, sir." Caller, "But I live in the city." "Raccoons can't live in the city." Me, I don't think the raccoon can read the city limits sign. Story 44. An operator visited my internship program last summer to talk about his career and answer any questions about the profession. I asked him this very question, and then he told the story about a stupid lady who called 911 because there was a turtle on her lawn, multiple times. Story 45. Calls 911 to report a massive natural gas leak in their house. Is told to evacuate everyone from structure. Multiple police officers and fire engines rush over. Police arrive first. Cops start chuckling and tell caller to not worry. Caller refused to believe the officers when told that the gas leak was in fact skunk spray that happened in the yard. Insisted the FD check every room in the house. After it was wrapped up, one of the more patient officers spoke with the caller and found out they had moved in recently. And this was their fifth time ever smelling skunk because they had always lived in very urban areas and had just relocated to the suburbs. Story 46. I've got to pick just one. We have an appliance repair shop in the middle of the town where I worked. And as an advertising gimmick, the owner has a set of dummy legs dressed in boots and pants inside an old washer. A lady calls in on 911 panicking because she just drove by the shop and there's a man stuck in a washer in the parking lot. I politely explain to her that it's a dummy, which just pisses her off and makes her double down on her insistence that it's a person and we need to do our jobs. The legs are standing up at a 90-degree angle and perfectly stationary. There's really no way to even think that it's a person. Story 47. As a translator for a cruise line, sometimes I man their operator, where the 911 line comes through. Aside from the usual, my remote is not working and my toilet won't flush. The cake probably goes to people complaining about ship movement. I've had one a while back with a vessel coming to Miami from Europe. This lady would call fuming, demanding the captain, slow down. We tried explaining that it's mostly rough sea and strong winds that makes the ship rock, meaning the speed adds very little. But she's been on 5 cruises before, so she knows better. I'd legit put the phone down, talk to myself for a couple of minutes, and get back to her saying the captain would try his best. She'd call about twice a day. Fun. Story 48. I was a social worker and I witnessed a truly stupid call to 911. It was during a safety check. I had to drop by the house randomly while the dad was visiting with his daughter. I get there and was informed that the police were called. The dad's brother, who was a little person, was upset that the dad took the wheels off his bike and put them on his niece's bike. I waited until the police arrived, and they had a stern talk with the adults in the house. Story 49. I'm not the 911 operator in this story. I'm the child. As a child, I bit an Xmas light. It shattered in my mouth and my mom freaked out. I hadn't swallowed any of it though. So she has me spit out the pieces and rinse my mouth with water and spit to get any small shards. This is when she decides to call 911 after solving the problem herself. I'm pretty sure the operator hung up on her the first time. After the second call, they sent a fire crew and they looked in my mouth. Didn't see any glass and gave me a teddy bear. Story 50. My wife was a dispatcher for a tiny rural town. One call she got, a lady asked if there was a prison break or escaped convicts. There wasn't, but when asked why, she said she saw 2 men who looked like convicts. My wife was skeptical, but sent a car to drive by. It was just 2 black dudes walking down the street wearing normal clothes. Good old country racism. Story 51. I've picked up a ton of them that ask for taxis/lifts / a ride from an officer. But honestly, the one that took the cake was I received a call from an intoxicated Native American that wanted to report a removed person. He said that 2 women were in his apt and they were drunk and throwing cigarette butts on his carpet. Once officers arrived, they removed them both. One of them had a warrant and they took her in, but once they looked through his apt, there was a giant bag of WD sitting in open view from the door. Needless to say, he was arrested as well. Side note, WD was still a controlled substance at the time. Story 52. Dumbest in that someone could have been hurt. 12-year-old calls to say someone broke into his house. Parents are away. He grabs his younger sister and hides in the closet where parents keep guns. He explains his dad taught him how to use the guns and is aiming the gun at the closet door. They live way off in the middle of nowhere. It was Halloween and the parents went to a party, had the brilliant idea to come home and scare the kids. Kid ended up realizing who it was by hearing the parents laughing to themselves as they snuck through the house, having no clue how bad things could have gotten. Story 53. We have a 911 line and a separate non-emergency line. Both of these came in on the 911 line for reporting emergencies. 1. A fairly distraught caller complaining that someone was feeding the geese too much bread at the park. 2. A call wanting police to investigate the Amazon package on the side of the road in case it was stolen. Story 54. I don't answer the phones, but I do work on a frontline ambulance responding to 999 calls. Got a call for anaphylaxis in a 30-something-year-old, so we sped over there, preparing our plan for treatment so it can go nice and smoothly. Get in there. The guy is sat on his sofa absolutely fine, breathing normal, no swelling or any symptoms at all. Turns out, He was frightened. He was going into anaphylaxis because he fell into some stinging nettles several hours before and was worried because his arm was coming up in a painful red bumpy rash. How I didn't laugh in his face still amazes me. Story 55. I was the caller, and my brother and I were genuinely confused. Our neighbor's donkey had escaped and was in the middle of the road in the dark, and we almost hit it. And so did the guy in front of us. When you start a 911 call with, I don't know if this is an emergency, the palpable irritation in the you receive an answer is completely understandable. But, someone's donkey is in the middle of the road? Oh, yeah. That, where? They were as genuinely baffled as we were. Story 56. Had a guy call at like 3 a.m. whispering. He and his wife had stayed up drinking. She had passed out on top of him, and he couldn't get up and could barely breathe. She was 400 lbs plus, and he was 150. They had just moved from out of state, and he didn't remember his address, and couldn't reach any pieces of mail, and was calling from a cell phone in the days before smartphones. That was a fun one to figure out. Story 57. I had a call from a person speeding and driving very erratically on the road. Deputy flips on lights and sirens, attempting to pull the car over. The driver of the car called 911 to check if they were really being pulled over, if it was a real cop pulling them over, and did they really have to stop? Needless to say, the person on the phone was obviously drunk, and I had to explain that yes, they were getting pulled over, so they needed to stop the car. Story 58. Mother calls in to let us know that she's leaving her 10-year-old daughter at home alone because she did not behave in school and could not go to the movies with the rest of the family. She goes on to say that if her daughter calls 911 to just ignore it, because she's known to make things up. Once I managed to pull my eyebrows back down to their normal position, I calmly explained to her that if her daughter calls 911 for any reason, we are going out to that house and she will be fined for leaving her there alone. Story 59. I'm not an emergency worker, but I have one where I am the caller. When I was 3, my parents worked nights cleaning offices. My oldest siblings were old enough that we didn't need a babysitter. I wanted a bedtime story, but no one would read me one. I used the phone in our parents' room and called 911, asking them to read me a bedtime story. They called back and asked my sister if she had a little sister. 911 will not read you a bedtime story. Story 60. I could go on and on and on. The most common for me seems to be people calling 911 because they're just not feeling well. Absolutely things they could go to the urgent care or their primary care doctor for. Most recently, I had a guy call us because he wanted to go to the emergency room for a COVID test, and he didn't have a ride. Absolutely zero complaints. Said he sneezed a couple of times. Ambulances aren't taxis. CVS sells COVID tests for like $20. There was a CVS less than a mile away from him. Story 61. Story 62. I used to take 999 calls in the UK. Worst calls that I can remember off the top dot of my head. Pizza delivered with wrong topping. Picked up trousers from dry cleaners and they weren't clean, and the caller had a job interview the following day. Ran out of beer at house party and to save anyone drink driving. Could we deliver some? A bird flew into the house and won't leave. A bird crap on their head. Different call to above. Story 63. There are so many I don't know where to begin. I've had quite a few people who call because they've locked their keys in their car or house and want the fire department to come out and open the door for them. No call a locksmith. My partner took a call from a lady that was full-on hysterical because her boyfriend stubbed his toe. Had a lady who dreamt she called 911 for an ambulance and wanted to cancel them. Those are just a few. Story 64. Caller. The doors to the Circle K are locked and I don't see anyone inside. They are supposed to be open 24/7. Me. Sometimes they do that when they need to use the restroom. Just give it a couple of minutes. Caller. I've been standing out here for 10 minutes. Me. Sometimes it's more than pee. Story 65. Guy's friend drank half his beer and refused to pay for it. At first I thought it was a bartender, but it was a private residence. Other guy was supposed to go in half. Owed him $9. Officers dispatched because the guy said if we don't get the cops there, then they'll need to send an ambulance. I wish I knew what happened after. He hung up after I told him they were dispatched instead of staying on the line. It wasn't in the news, so guess it got de-escalated. Story 66. I had a woman who thought she called the number on the TV to order a Dermawand. Called right back, and I answered again, making it clear to her that not only did I not sell Dermawands, but she was also tying up an emergency line with her phone calls. The third time she yelled at me, blaming me for her being unable to purchase this junk. Though her disregard for others' emergencies didn't deserve the kindness, I looked up the Dermawand number and gave it to her. Story 67. I wasn't the 911 operator, but the lady called 911 first and then animal control, who then connected her to me in the wildlife department. The lady was a school principal. The school was having an assembly and a hummingbird flew into the auditorium. And this lady frantically evacuated the place and was hysterical about how 911 animal control wouldn't help because this is such a dangerous situation. This lady legit thought that the 5-gram bird was like a flying dart that would skewer people's eyes if they got too close. Story 68. When my grandma was still living alone, she was somewhat of a repeat offender for this. Once she was on a walk and found a dead bird on the sidewalk. She had to call 911 because what if it was bird flu? Worse yet, after receiving her non-driver ID, she noticed the expiration date was like 20 years in the future. This alarmed her greatly, for some reason, and called emergency services to explain to her why her personal identification was good for so long. Story 69. I worked emergency medical in the military and got my share of stupid calls. My favorite was a spouse calling saying I'm leaving the country on vacation tomorrow and I need a few vaccinations or I won't be allowed to enter country XYZ. This call was at 2 a.m. The ER doesn't just give out vaccinations. Needless to say, she screamed at me. I laughed. My officer in charge laughed. Story 70. Not directly 911, but we assist them. I got a call once that went like this. I got a call about a low battery life. I was hoping to get more info. Well, it looks like you have a sensor that has a low battery. Yeah, but what does that mean? It means a sensor has a low battery and needs to be changed. Oh, okay, thanks. I'll change it next week. Okay, have a good day. Story 71. My grandma had a crush on the sheriff, and the local police station was right down the street from our house. She called a lot, but mostly she would call on me if I misbehaved. I remember one time my grandma called because I wouldn't go to sleep, even though I was in bed the whole time, just not willing to sleep. They showed up and talked to me, and it freaked me out. But she kept doing it, and eventually they picked me up. Story 72. I'm Scottish, so it was 999, but a few spring to mind. 1. My 8-year-old went get in the bath. Can you send an officer out to tell her she needs to? 2. During bird flu. My dog just sniffed a dead pigeon and then sneezed. I think it has the bird flu 3. I just left my groceries on the bus. Can you send a car to intercept it, please? Story 73. 25-year-old male was jogging, fell, and skinned his knee. 6-year-old stung by a bee and cried. Not anaphylactic, no allergies, not crying anymore. Just when it happened. 50-year-old who had a doctor appointment at the doctor office and was too tired to walk there, so wanted an ambulance to bring her to her appointment. Someone wanting to book a COVID shot. Story 74. Recently, I had a lady call and ask if we could have a unit house sit while they went on vacation a few days. She offered to let them sleep in the house, eat the food in the fridge, take the dog out, etc. She got mad when I told her that's not something we could do. She'd have to ask someone else or hire help. She threw a fit and said I didn't understand anything. Oh well. Story 75. I got a call from a man demanding a police officer because the water from his neighbors and ground sprinklers was hitting his connected lawn. It wasn't saturating it or anything. Literally just part of the spray of water hit maybe 2 square feet of his grass, and he was furious. If you ever wonder why police take forever to respond to a call, there is a good chance that they are tied up dealing with people like this. Story 76. People have called 911 for parking complaints. Those always pissed me off. Also, right during the start of COVID, this lady called to make an animal complaint, and she was completely convinced that the dog that stopped to pee on the boulevard was spreading the coronal virus. I could literally go on all day long if you let me, but these two are first that come to mind. Story 77. I accidentally dialed 911 while playing Call of Duty Black Ops while having a conversation with my bisexuality friend at the time. Stop killing me. Use your sniper. Do you love him? Found out with easily 20 police officers knocking at the door. I was around 13 years old then. Story 78. My son told me a story of how these calls work and that sometimes they ask for a supervisor when told they called the wrong line. The supervisor is the desk sergeant at the local precinct where the call originates. The operators dispatch, they do both, have to be nice and provide customer service, but the desk sergeants don't, and those calls are apparently hilarious. Story 79. A friend got a call from an elderly woman saying his new neighbor had kidnapped children in the apartment. During the day, she heard them screaming desperately, and at night they cried, calling someone named Raul. She was very concerned about it and couldn't stand one more night and decided to call 911. Turned out the neighbor had a parrot and a cat as a pet. Story 80. 1. 2 a.m. Hello, there is a hedgehog in my garden. And he doesn't belong there. 2. You need to come here quick. What's the situation? There is a bird in a tree that giving me a weird look. So you are telling me you can interpret the look of a bird? Story 81. I called 911 once thinking someone owed it in the bathroom at work. I couldn't get the door open, slide lock so no key, and I was freaking out. EMT showed up and got the door open and no one was there. The door was just jammed and I felt like such a git. EMT were pissed. Story 82. 40 Celsius outside. I received a call from someone calling for a stranger they saw walking down the sidewalk without a water bottle. No distress, nothing. Kid woke up with a night terror. Parents called 911. Story 83. I'm not a 911 operator, but found this funny. One time had to call 911 to report several stray cows in the middle of a 50 miles per hour road at 1 a.m. This was close to home, and we don't even know where they could have come from. Drunk cows. Story 84. An egret, whitewater bird, was out of the water, like just standing on the land next to the water. Nothing wrong with it, just birds shouldn't be on land, I guess. She wanted us to send animal control to put it back in the water. No. Story 85. I had a guy call at 2 a.m. for a tummy ache arrived to take him to the hospital, and he said, "You don't have anything that can just cure me on the spot?" I'm pretty sure it's food poisoning. I don't want to go out into the cold at 2 a.m. Neither did I, doofus. Story 86. I'm not a 911 operator, but here's something my 91-year-old mother did a few months ago. She forgot how to turn off the microwave before it finished, so she called the police. They showed up. We now have babysitters coming to her house every day. Story 87. There was a mentally ill person in my county that would call in on 911 about how Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, and our sheriff were having sex in her house's vents, but only when the heat kicked on. Last I knew, she got committed to a psych ward and is getting help now. Story 88. Ooh, I just remembered another one. Guy calls in very agitated. Says his mother just stabbed him in the back. We get officers going in a hurry. Couple more questions, and it comes to light that he meant she metaphorically stabbed him in the back. Story 89. There are people that exist that are extremely afraid of cats. Like hysterical on the phone, afraid of cats. I've gotten at least 3 calls of people screaming or crying about a stray cat on their property. Story 90. We've gotten visits as my autistic son had called and mumbled into his phone. I'd rather have an unnecessary visit than forego a necessary one. Yes, we fixed the phone. Story 91. So I'm an EMT, but we got sent for a stubbed toe. Someone was hungry. A CNA called us because after the glucometer's finger stick, there was blood. I wish I was joking. Story 92. Someone once requested an ambulance because their 10-year-old kid had a nightmare. Also, at the beginning of 2020, there was a lot of, "I have a cough. Is it COVID?" Story 93. There's some black kids standing on the sidewalk outside my apartment. There's a dead starling in my lawn. My out-of-state adult children won't send me money. Arrest them. All on 911 emergency line. Story 94. I once walked in on my little brother, this in the era of landline phones, calling 911 and saying, "Is this the operator? I need an operation on my banana." Story 95. AMT here was dispatched as a stubbed toe. Ended up being that the patient couldn't reach their remote from their chair and called us to get it. Fun times. Story 96. My friend's wife was an operator. She received a call from a woman whose tongue piercing was inextricably locked to her partner's banana piercing. Or maybe the guy made the call.